Oh, hey, I didn't see you come in there. Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be continuing the series, the full stack trading app tutorial, and I'm going to be starting on part 3, which is going to be on Python and SQL, and how to take our SQL statements and use them to build a stock universe database. So get a big database full of stock symbols that we're interested in trading. And instead of using, manual SQL statements that we write directly on the command line, I'm going to show you how to use Python to execute SQL statements in a loop. That way we can get some data from an API and then dynamically loop through and insert all of these symbols into the database. And I'm going to show you how to evolve our initial database schema. So we started with an initial design of our database, but over time, as our project grows, obviously we're going to have new tables, new columns. We might rename some depending on what we find. So it's important for us to learn how to evolve our database as our application gets more complicated. Before I get started with the tutorial, as always, I'm going to mention the website here where I am posting the written tutorials, and also mention that there's a mailing list that you can sign up for if you want updates about the site. There's a discussion board, links to the other videos, source code, and there's a donation link. And once again, I will thank each person that donated so far since the last video. So I want to thank Amit, who I think maybe donated twice already, to thank for the full stack trading app. And so we've posted part 2 already. So thank you, Amit. Thank you, Robert Reboot. He said he feels like he's getting $799 course for free. Great feeling. So great. I'm glad you found that much value in it. There's going to be tons of free videos. Like I said, by the end of next year, there will probably be over 200 free videos on this YouTube channel. So keep watching, and I'm going to keep producing new material. I can come up with tons of ideas for this kind of stuff, so I'm just going to keep going with that. Thank you to It's Legit for buying 2 drinks. James Wang, who said thanks for the great videos. Someone who is anonymous bought 3. Thank you so much. And Neil A, he said, I provide the right amount of details. Program and finance are his favorite topics. And yeah, exactly. That's what this channel is going to be all about. This long random string here. Thanks for the perfectly pitched educational material. So thanks a lot to everyone who donated. And if you're interested in making a contribution, this link is available on the website. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started with the tutorial. And so I have it pulled up here, and I'm going to kind of go off this as my notes and then write some code as I go to explain it all. So this tutorial, in the last 2 videos, we started off learning a little bit about SQL. We installed the SQLite command line utility, and we also walked through the CRUD operations, which are create, read, update, and delete. And we talked about how we use those to build a database-driven application, how that's kind of the fundamental, core of our application. We're always just maintaining these database records here, and then we're going to build up this database over time. And so I showed you how to execute those from the command line, but now I'm going to show you how to execute those SQL statements from Python. So let's go ahead and get started with a code editor. So I'll start a new editor here. So I'm going to do a new Visual Studio Code window here, and I will get it to the right size for the video, like so. And that should be good. Okay, so let's talk about it. Okay, so the first thing you're going to need to connect to a SQLite database is the Python module. You need to import SQLite 3. So you can copy both of these lines from here. And so I'm going to create a new folder actually for this as well. So I'm going to call it full stack. Looks like I already have a full stack trading app. I'm going to call it full stack app, and I'll post the source code for this later as well. So I'm going to open this folder because I want to start a brand new one here, and I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call this file create.db.py. Okay, and I recognize that we already created the database in the first tutorial, but I'm going to show you we're going to copy those SQL statements into here and have Python create the database for us. So we'll have a series of scripts that connect to the database from Python and execute SQL statements, right? So I'm going to paste in those 2 lines. So this imports SQLite 3 and also connects to a database called app.db. So if there's already a database called app.db, then it will connect to that one. But if it doesn't exist, this will go ahead and create it. So I'm going to go ahead and run this program and have it create. So I run the program, and now you see there's an app.db there. So it created an SQLite database. And since I have a SQLite installed in our previous tutorial, I can type SQLite3 appdb, and it will open it right up. But if I type .schema, right, there's nothing there. So I'll type .quit there. In the last one we had tables. I created a brand new database. All right, so we have a brand new database. We know how to connect to it. So use the connect method. So you import SQLite, use the connect method or function to connect to the database. You just pass it the name of the database, right? So that's all good. So the next thing we want to do is take our create table statements that we created, that we used in the first tutorials, right? So we created this database design, and then I showed you how to write these create table statements. So these defined our stock and stock price table, you know, open, high, low, close, and then we have the symbol and the company. So we executed those raw SQL queries, right? But what we want to do is create a new cursor here. So let's copy this. And if I put this inside, okay, put that inside, you'll see I start out with this cursor equals connection.cursor. So we created a new database connection, but to execute queries, we need to create this cursor object. So this object is what has this execute method. And when we have this execute method or function, right, we just pass it the SQL query we want to run, right? So we create the connection, we create the cursor object and store it in cursor, and then we call .execute, and then we just need to pass it some SQL we want to execute, okay? So we're gonna create the stock table if it doesn't already exist, which has an ID, which is our primary key, our symbol, and our company, which are text, and then we're creating the stock prices that each reference a stock. And then at the very end, after we execute both of these statements, we need this line connection.commit. And so the commit commits those changes to the database. And the reason that's there, right, is because when we're using a database, something could go wrong, and we'll show something that could go wrong a little bit later in this tutorial, like later in this video. But if something goes wrong, like you're trying to insert a bunch of data and some exception gets thrown, right, then sometimes you could be left in a weird state. Like let's say you're inserting thousands of price records and you lose an internet connection or something, right? You might want to rerun your program again after you're connected, but if something goes wrong, you might want to roll back all of that data. You don't want it to be stuck in a weird intermediate state. So there's a lot of times where there's bad data or some erroneous condition where you just want to roll back your database queries that you'd executed. So we'll talk about how to roll back and handle errors a little bit later on. But just know now, in order to commit anything to the database, we have to call this commit function, and then our changes will get written to the database. So with those lines, we should be able to run it again. So I'll run this create db.py. Looks like it ran without any errors. And now if I type SQLite3 just to verify, and I type .schema, you'll see there are two tables in that database. And if I do select star from stock, there's no records. Select star from stock price, no records. So we're going to want to populate these tables, right? So I'm going to type .quit, and that will quit from SQLite, and then we're back to our command line prompt. We could run this again, for instance. What happens if I run this again? See, I have these create table statements. So will this create the database again and mess up? No, it won't, because we have this if not exists. So it only creates these tables if they don't exist. So it's nice to have this create db.py. That way, when we put this on a server somewhere, we have the script we can run to create our database on whatever server we're running this on, or if I want to run this on a different laptop and get set up with a new environment there, bam, run the script, you got the database there as well, right? Okay, so we have a way to initialize our database and install our new application from scratch. So what's next? Okay, so I talked about how there's a database cursor that is used to execute SQL queries. In this case, I executed create table statements. But what if we want to insert records into these tables? Well, let's create a new script called populate db, right? We created the database, let's populate it. So how do we do that? So you see I have another little small script here, and all it does is the same thing. It imports SQLite, connects to the same database, creates a cursor, and instead of executing create table statements, we're going to execute insert statements. And remember, insert statements create new records in a table. So we're going to insert new records into the stock table. We have the symbol and company columns we want to insert into. And so if we want to insert Adobe and Verizon, right? And let's just do another one just for fun. Let's say this is Zillow. I believe Z is the right one still. I think there's a ZG, which is a different class of shares, right? So we're going to insert 3 records. And then when we insert those 3 records, we're going to commit it to the database. So I'm going to run this script. I'm going to run Python 3 populate DB. And it looks like something went wrong. So what went wrong? It says incomplete input. So insert into stock Adobe Inc. So what went wrong? I can't see at the moment. So let's try to run this in SQLite directly and try to debug this. So if I'm going to run this without quotes real quick. Oh, I see it already. So you see I have the columns in parentheses, and then I start a parentheses here, and there's not a closing parentheses. So that's my problem. So I'm going to quit back out, and I'll fix this in the tutorial, and you won't have to run into this yourself. So let me see if I can get out of this weird state by closing the quotes. Okay, there we go. All right, so we need an extra parentheses, and we'll fix this. So that'll be right there, that'll be right there, and that'll be right there. And then I'll go back to the tutorial, and let's go ahead and update those lines. That way I can verify the code in the written tutorial actually works. All right, so that's in now, and that'll be up to date when this gets published. Okay. So now we know how to fix an SQL error and what it looks like when something goes wrong, which is a good skill to learn. So I did that on purpose. And let me click play again and see what happens. So it says incomplete input. So there's my parentheses there. Run it one more time, and it finished running this time. Okay, good. So now if I go to SQLite 3, I'm just showing you how if you needed to debug at a low level on your database and log directly in, which you'll often have to do to see, to understand it and know what went wrong. And so if I do select start from stock now, you'll see that my 3 stocks are in, and they automatically got assigned primary keys of 1, 2, and 3. So do .quit again and go out. So that's how we insert stocks one by one, right? But we don't want to insert stocks one by one. We want to insert an entire universe of stocks, which could be thousands of symbols. So we could do in the past, right? We've done, so I showed how to select the stocks that were in there. And we can also run a delete statement, for instance, right? So let's say if I want to delete these records because I'm ready to write a real script to insert all of the stock records. So let's go ahead and clear this out. So I'm just going to do delete from stock. And if I run this, right, that'll delete all the stocks from my database, and we can start over, right? So I did select star from stock, and now there's none anymore because I deleted them all. So we showed how to create some new tables, insert some new records, select them to verify they're there, and now we deleted them all. And now we're going to figure out how to write a script to create a tradable stock universe, and we're going to figure out a data source for retrieving all of our different stock symbols. All right, so tradable stock universe. So where do we get a list of every single stock symbol available? And so we can filter that down and determine which stocks we want to trade. Well, I gave one source here. It's called from the NASDAQ. So they upload a few text files to an FTP site that I've linked here. And if you go here, this is actually an FTP site. Not as common lately, not as many people use FTP as they used to, but you can see there's some text files in here. So this is just raw data getting dumped into a directory somewhere that you can download. And so if you click NASDAQ listed, for instance, right, you'll get this text file downloaded, and you see how it's like this pipe delimited file. And there's some key to all of these on the NASDAQ site somewhere of what, N and Q mean here. But you see, you recognize common symbols here, Apple, Apple Inc., and so forth. And you could parse this out. And there's also like other listed, for instance. So if we look inside of here, there's some more stocks inside. So I believe if you go in other listed, yeah, so you can find, in addition to like companies like Apple, you can find like ETFs. So, Here's SPXL, which is a triple bull ETF for the S&P 500. So there's like other types of instruments in here other than businesses and companies. These are things you can trade, like UVXY, right? Which is ultra long the VIX, I think. UVXY, so that's a bet on volatility. So ultra short term, not ultra short. So yeah, UVXY is something you buy to say, oh, there's about to be a huge spike in volatility, which I think there might be actually pretty soon. So good deal there. So that's one source of raw data. But as you can see, that might require a little bit of cleaning up of that data because we're downloading like multiple text files. And then we're looking at some key, and we need to figure out how to parse those and merge it all together correctly, which might be a bit of an undertaking. But and that's not that complicated. But there actually is a very simple API for this that Alpaca provides. So there's this list of tradable assets, and it's just one function call you can make in order to get a list as JSON. And then that is nicely structured, and we know all the symbols, we know which exchange they're on, we have a name for each symbol, and so forth. So they've returned the data in a very nice format that we can use. And so I thought we'd use that, especially since they already have a market data API and a brokerage, right? So we need to build this series, this full stack app, we need to build it on top of some type of platform that lets us execute trades, right, easily and free. Ideally, and so Alpaca provides that. They provide a list of tradable assets. They provide some market data. We can add other sources, but it's nice that they have kind of an all-in-one solution for this stuff. So I figure we should start with this, and it's very easy to get set up. And also, I've covered this on the channel multiple times, so a lot of you probably who have watched this channel and followed it for a while, Alpaca was actually one of the first videos I made for the channel, and so there's a good tutorial on just how to get set up. So if you've never got set up before, you can watch this video that I link here, and this walks you through setting up an API key. So if you want to follow along, go ahead and go to alpaca.markets and sign up for an account. It's free, very easy. You get the key, you'll be up and running in a couple minutes here. So I logged into my paper trading account here so that we could test this out. And if you look on the right side, it has your API keys. You just do view, and I generate a new one for each video. So I generate a key. You just need that API key ID and the secret key, and we'll copy those in a moment. And so in the post here, you'll see that I install the Alpaca Trade API. So you want this pip. Make sure you have pip. If you've been following these videos, you've already done this a million times. So that's how you install the dependency. We're going to install the Alpaca Trade API like that. And if you install this, you have an SDK, a library to call functions that Alpaca provides. So this is the official library, the official package, and we can use all the methods built in there. All right, we installed the Alpaca Trade API package. So now all we have to do is use it in our program. So on the imports, you'll see here, scroll down, you'll see I import Alpaca Trade API as Trade API. So it's a little bit hard to type that out. So I import it as a shorter name, which they do in their own documentation. And so we have all these functions available under Trade API. And so now, instead of deleting from stock, what we want to do is call the Trade API and call the list assets function. So before we can do that, we need this code here, right? And so let me comment out briefly. Actually, we can leave this in. Let's just leave the database connection in here, but we're not going to use it yet. And so we're going to create a new instance of API. And so we call trade API.rest. So this is how you create an Alpaca API client. And it requires two things. It requires your API key ID and your API secret. And so I'm going to copy these from the interface for Alpaca right there. So that's the key ID. This is the secret. And the base URL is paper API alpaca.markets, right? And that will access our paper trading account, which means not real money, but it's great for practicing or accessing these functions like list assets. And when we're ready to trade with real money, with our real brokerage account, if we have one, you can erase paper API and set it to trade with real money. So that's after you feel comfortable with your algorithm. And it looks like I just deleted that. Okay, good. So that's good to go. And then now I have this API method. So with Alpaca, you get this API. And once you have this Alpaca Trade API installed, I have Visual Studio Code set up with the Python extension, so I have some auto-completion to show me all the methods available. But there's one called list assets, right? And list assets will get us a list of symbols. So I'm going to say api.listAssets. So assets equals api.listAssets, and then we'll have a brand new list, right, that's returned. And let's loop through the list by for asset and asset, and let's just print out and see what it gives us. Okay, so I'll run this program again. We're calling the Alpaca API using our API key and secret key. We're calling the method for list assets on the API client. And you can see I'm looping through each of the assets, and then I print them out. And look at that. We have this giant list of asset. And these are objects. So this isn't a dictionary. This is an asset object. So we can access all of these keys here with the dot syntax. And so you see these asset objects have attributes. So they have a class like US equity. They have an exchange. So we might be, I think we're going to want to update our database. So we only started with a couple of database fields, but since there's more information here, it looks like a lot of this stuff would be useful to us. So I'm going to show you how to alter your database tables so that we can evolve our application to store more and more useful data. So before we do that, let's look at this asset object a little more. Looks like each asset has an ID. So that's like Alpaca's internal identifier. It might be useful to store that. We don't need it yet, but we'll keep that in mind that that's available. We have a name like Apple, right? Shortable, whether it's shortable or not. Symbol, status, and tradable. So that's all seems very useful. So let's add on. Let's talk about how to access these. So since this is an object, we can type asset.name, for instance. If I ran this, so I'm going to run that. And you see how it just prints the name by itself. So each of those attributes we can access using this dot syntax. So we know how to access company names and symbols, right? We can do asset.name, asset.symbol in a loop. And if you'll remember earlier, right, we know how to insert a record into a database because symbol and company. And we just need to take that symbol and company, the values that we got from the API, and plug them into a loop, and we'll just do this insert statement over and over again. So I'll copy one of these insert statements for cursor.execute, right? Insert into stock, symbol company, and we just replace these values. And so what we do is put these question marks. And since this is dynamic, at the end of the string, we put a comma, and then we need a tuple here. So a list of values to insert. And so I'm going to take that asset.name, and this will be dynamic in this loop. So this asset.name will be replaced. This value will become asset.name. And then asset.symbol is the first column, right? So our first placeholder, we want the symbol. And then we want asset.name right there. So if we do that, let's see what happens. So we have the insert statement running in a loop. And so I'll run the program again to populate the database. And let's see what happens. And look at that. There's a SQL integrity error. Unique constraint failed, stock symbol. So yeah, what caused that? If you remember when we created our database, we created this unique constraint saying the symbol needs to be unique. And something in here violated that constraint. That means we had a duplicate symbol. So we got an exception here. So our program got blown up because there's a duplicate symbol in here. And so let's diagnose this and see why this happened and what we can do about it. So it threw an exception. So this is an exception. And so we can add this try catch around it to catch to the exception. So I'm going to do try except exception as E. And if I print E, you can see a string that's associated with this exception. And so what we can also do is print the exception, and we can also print whatever symbol we were on. So we'll see what symbol blew this thing up, and that will give us some clue as to what went wrong, and we can say, oh, that symbol, something's wrong with that symbol. What's the problem here? So I'm going to run this again, right? And our transaction never got committed because our program just stopped on that exception. Okay, look at this. So this is what went wrong. There's a bunch of unique constraints that failed here, which is crazy, right? Look at this. There's a bunch of duplicates in here. And so is there something wrong with our database, or did Alpaca give us some data that wasn't ideal? So let's see. Looks like VXX, which is the VIX ETF, we got a violation here. So is that actually in there twice? Let's see. So I'm going to comment out this real quick. And then we're going to say if asset.symbol, so as we're looping through, if we're on VIX, if the symbol is VIX, let's print the asset and let's look what we got in our response. Okay, so I'll write that out. All right, look at that. Okay, so I ran that, and you can see indeed as I was looping through, there's actually 2 copies of VXX in here, which is weird. Actually, that's unexpected, and that's why it's important. Even though this company manages all this data and provides all these services for you, you still, as an end user, you can't always assume all the data is perfect. You have to make sure you handle all your errors, right? And so it looks like this is the same name. It's the same symbol, VXX, except for one of them is active and one is inactive. So I'm not sure why that is. So let's go ahead and only try the active one. So it seems like there's duplicates, but there's only one active maybe. So let's see if we can run this and only insert. So I'm going to comment this back in, and I'll say if asset status equal active. Let's try it this way and see if that works. So let's only insert the active ones. I'm not sure why they deactivated one and created a new one. Maybe there's some adjustment. Maybe when there's splits and reverse splits or some adjustments, then they deactivate the old one and keep the price history and create a new record. I'm not quite sure yet. So let's figure this out. So I'm going to run this. So if it's active, we're going to insert it. And look at that. It looks like, okay, so there's a lot more in here now because our program actually finished. And so basically we caught all the duplicate constraints, right? And that's fine because it was still able to continue. And it looks like we had already inserted that last run through. Since we caught the exception, it actually ran through and ran all of our inserts except for the ones where there were duplicates. All right. So I think we're good there actually. So if I do SQLite 3 app.db, a bunch of inserts ran, and then we ran this a second time, and that's why they were already in the database. So now if I do select star from stock, you'll see we have a ton of symbols now. So that's great. So if I do select star from stock, where a symbol equals VIX, VXX, you see we just have one. Our unique constraint worked, and we did some validation and only focused on the active stocks. So I think we're good. We got all unique stocks here. So let's practice. Look at that. We have 10,250 records. And so let's use the SQL we learned to select this in different ways. So let's select all of the stocks where the symbol, so select star from stock, where symbol like a%. So let's find all the ones that start with A, all the ones that start with Z, right? We can select a count, like how many stocks, count star, how many stocks start with the letter Z. Select count star from stock where company like, and then Z%. And there you go. There's 37 stocks in this list that start with the letter Z. So you can see we have a pretty nice list here of over 10,000 symbols that we should be able to trade. So now that I think about it, there was actually an attribute called tradable. So let's only insert the tradable stocks. And you see we've already inserted these. Let's redo our whole database to make sure this runs through again, just to make sure we didn't overlook anything. So I'm going to do delete from stock in SQLite. I'm going to do .quit. And so now when I run it, I'm going to do if set asset.stats equals active or and asset.tradable. So we only want the active tradable stocks in our universe. And let me run this and see if we can get through without any problems. So I'm going to hit the play button here, run it through, and let's see if we can insert with no error starting from scratch. All right, it's running. That seems pretty good so far. And it finished, no error. So we started from the very beginning. We filtered out, there was no exceptions. we only filtered to the active stocks and the tradable stocks, and that results in no duplicates, which is great. Okay, so Alpaca was fine here. We just need to make sure we understand how the API works, right? So we worked with the data, we figured out how it works, we caught any errors and bad assumptions we made, and built a cleaner database as a result. So now if I select star from stock, you see we went down from 10,000 something down to 8,926. So we filtered out all the untradable assets and all the inactive assets. So now we're down to a smaller universe, and that's great. So we can do our select count star, right? So we select count star from stock. That gets us our count of 8,926. Anything else interesting we can do? We can select star from stock, order by symbol, descending, limit 100, right? And that would get us the stocks and the symbols in reverse alphabetical order. So if you are not very familiar with SQL, get really familiar, because we're going to keep developing this skill over time, because we're going to build some user interfaces that execute SQL. So if you want to have like sortable columns, you need to do order by. If you want to do pagination, you need to limit by 10 or 100 and show those on a page at a time, and so forth, right? So great. So we've hooked up the Alpaca API, and we have a tradable universe of stocks. So that is awesome. So what else? We covered, okay, so we covered the API, we covered how to insert records, how to catch exceptions, how to verify the records are there. Oh, and another thing, I wanted to just verify that we have an up-to-date database. Like, are we getting fresh data from this API? And so I noticed, I read some article, there was a new ETF called WFH, Work From Home. Let's see if that's in there. So select star from symbol or select star from stock, where symbol equals WFH. And there you go, direction work from home. So we have brand new ETFs here, and so that's one of the huge benefits of using an API like Alpaca. They're in charge of managing all of this data, and all we need to do is pull it in, and we get this up-to-date database right here. And so we don't have this like old outdated CSV that was in my GitHub repository. We're dynamically fetching it. So there you go, we have this universe of stocks, but universe, we don't have to trade all 8,000 something stocks. In fact, a universe of stocks could just be a very small number of stocks. Like, there's some people that out there, lots of these people actually, some of the best traders I've seen are people that just trade SPY. They just trade the S&P 500 ETF, and that's it. And they study that movement. Or just trading Apple over the years could have been a better strategy than selecting all of these different stocks. Like, if you just felt like you had a good understanding of like the cycles of Apple stock as new 5G was released, you might have some strategy around how to trade some type of cyclical stock, or the seasonality of energy stocks or something like that. So you might want to narrow down your universe. So if you want to delete some records out of here, you can totally do that. So I'm going to maintain mostly an up-to-date database. However, I'm going to make one change. I decided I hate trading Twitter stock because I always thought it was going to go to 100. But it never happened, so I'm going to ban myself from trading that stock. I'm going to remove it from my tradable stock universe. So in my database, I'm going to do delete from stock, where symbol equals Twitter. And I don't have to worry about that one anymore. It's out. It's not in the universe that we're considering. So that's how to fetch all of these symbols from Alpaca, and how to whittle it down to just tradable assets that are active, and also removing Twitter because we don't like it. So that's great. That's a good database. And so what are we going to do next? In the next video, what we're going to do is show how to update records over time. So obviously these symbols change, stocks get delisted, companies go bankrupt, new IPOs come onto the market, and we don't want to keep checking manually to see if our database is up to date. What we're going to want to do in the next tutorial, I'm going to show you how to use scheduled jobs. So cron jobs or cron tasks in Unix is built into the operating system. And for Windows, I'm going to see if I can show you how to use Windows Scheduler. And what we'll do is every day run a program that checks for new symbols and updates this database. And this will also come in handy whenever we build our price database. When we're going to get historical data, but then each day or each 15 minutes, we can snapshot new data and update our database, and then we'll have this large database of prices so that we can use it for backtesting and store maybe a trade history and that sort of thing. So stay tuned for the next video, and we'll talk about scheduled jobs next, and check on the blog if you want a written version of this to follow along with this video. Thanks a lot for watching, and see you next time.